Welcome to Commander Pop Culture, a place to gather magical information with some laughs, might I add. Hello everyone, welcome to Murders at Markov Manor Spoilers. This will be the last one.
This is the end.
It's gonna be a long one because they spoiled all the commander decks and the rest of the remainder of the set, so let's get right into it. First off, hide in plain sight. For 4 mana at sorcery speed, you get to look at the top 5 cards, with the rest on the bottom cloaking 2 of them. It kind of reminds me of Collected Company, also known as Coco. Was super good back in its day. I don't know if it still gets played in Modern, but play it on your opponent's end step and you cheat in 2 creatures with, I think, 3 CMC or less. This kind of does the same thing, only it's a lot worse. You cloak them, and you're not even guaranteed the ability to flip them over. It's nowhere near as mana efficient, that's for sure. Niv Mizzet the Guild Pact. Flying hexproof from multicolored. Whenever it deals combat damage to a player, it deals X damage to any target. Target player draws X cards, you gain X life, where X is the number of different color pairs among permanents you control that are exactly 2 colors. So it's referring to Azorius, Boros, etc. For every permanent that's in play that has a representation gets fed into X. Interesting, you can target a player to draw X cards. If you're ever playing 2-headed giant, this seems like a really sweet card to have in your command zone, just in case you want to help out your teammate get out of a bind. But in general, he does a lot of work. Is like the super rubber band in terms of he gains you life. So after all the beating you're going to be taking, trying to fix your mana and get this into play and go to combat with it, you'll get some of that life back. Draw a ton of cards as well. World Soul's Rage. It deals X damage to any target. Put up to X land cards from your hand and or graveyard onto the battlefield tapped. Oh, I love this spell. I could care almost less for the damage portion. I care about the lands. If you're playing a bunch of fetches, you get them all back and get to use them again. They don't come in untapped. That's the fair part about this card. But it's also doing something to the board, most likely, on top of ramping you. If you're in red-green, you care about lands, this is a really good card for you. Because most of the time you ramp and it doesn't impact the board. People are just going to be ganging up on you when they see that you're X mana ahead of everyone else, and this at least takes something away. Anthrax Rampage. For 5 mana, destroy all artifacts you don't control. Exile the top X cards of your library. X is the number of artifacts that were put in the graveyard this turn. You may put a creature card exiled this way onto the battlefield at the beginning of your next end step. It's okay. I'd rather play the X spell that acts like an earthquake, and then if you pay 4 or greater into X, you destroy all artifacts. And if X is 8 or greater, you get a giant tremor kind of creature. I can't remember what it's called. I always forget the name of the card, but I'd rather play that over this any day of the week. You could get to cheat a creature into play, but you're exiling a lot of cards from the top of your library, so you might hit things you don't want to exile, because you're not getting it back. You get the creature, but nothing else. And it only deals with 1 permanent type, which is, it's not as flexible as Vandal Blast. You could either blow up 1 thing for 1 mana, or if it's late game, blow up everyone else's stuff, which is, this is a one-sided artifact wipe. That's probably the nicest part about this, and the creature portion is dessert, I guess you could say. Sometimes you get dessert, sometimes you don't. Reenact the crime. Exile a target non-land card in the graveyard that was put there from anywhere this turn. Copy it. You get to cast a copy without paying its mana cost. I like that it's super flexible. You could copy anything that was put into a graveyard other than a land. This seems like a fun card to be playing around. Audience with Tristani. Create a 0/1 plant creature token, then draw cards equal to the number of differently named creature tokens you control. Wow. This is another tool that I want to put in Izoni. Hopefully I don't forget it, because I'll have to update the deck again. But because Izoni is all about making as many tokens as you can, and you're just pulling from everything you can get. Like, I think in that deck, I have over 20 tokens that it plays. This has a really nice fit for that kind of stuff. Vengeful Tracker. Whenever an opponent sacks an artifact, it deals 2 damage to them. It's supposed to counter clues a little bit. I think this will shine in EDH to like punish treasure decks. Treasures seem to be very popular, and they probably need some hate thrown their way. I mean, loss of life isn't too impactful, not until their life totals are sub 20, then they're going to think twice. Loss of life is almost not good enough, I'd say. Illicit Masquerade has flash as an enchantment. Put an imposter counter on each creature you control. When a creature you control with an imposter counter dies, exile it, return up to one other target creature from your graveyard to the battlefield. Oh, that's kind of cool. You get to exchange it for something when it dies, and you do this for your whole board. Now, if the Illicit Masquerade gets destroyed, then you have a bunch of creatures with counters on them that won't have this ability. It's not like the counter gives the ability. It's the enchantment, and it cares about the counter. So keep that in mind if that should happen. You need both counters on your creatures and this enchantment in play, but it's cool, and I like the art. It makes a lot of sense. Ill-Timed Explosion. Draw 2 and discard 2 cards. When you do, it does X damage to each creature where X is the greatest mana value among cards discarded this way. It's card selection and could be just straight card draw. You don't have to discard, it says you may. It's another good tool for Izoni. Flash for 4 mana, gives target creature -4/-4. Whenever one more creature cards leave your graveyard, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. You're gonna have a lot of stuff leaving your graveyard. Descana, the Rage Mother. Enters battlefield, draw a card for each creature you control with base power and toughness of 2/2, so bears. Whenever a creature you control with base power, toughness 2 or 2 attacks, it gets +3/+3 till on a turn. So it's a 2/2 stat block tribal deck. That's kind of fun. You can turn to 5/5s and you get a big draw trigger on ETB. Interesting Naya commander. Show-stopping surprise. Choose target creature you control, turn it face up. If it's face down, then it deals damage equal its power to each other creature. It's like Chandra's Ignition, but a little more convoluted, and it doesn't hit players, unfortunately. To sack Judas Hellhound has Unleash.
Again, you have made me unleash my dogs of war.
Other dogs control have Unleash. Creature control with counters on them have Haste. When it attacks, add a red for each tagged creature. Holy cow. That is a lot of text. They could have saved a little bit of like text space and just wrote all dogs you control have Unleash instead of putting Unleash on itself. I wonder why they did that. The Haste Enabler, meaning when your creatures come back with an Unleash, they can attack the same turn, and then you get a bunch of mana for it. Everything kind of just feeds into itself on this card. Really cool. Panoptic Projector. 4 mana, you get to, the next face down spell you cast this turn is 3 less to cast. So you get to cheat 1 thing face down. Turning face down, permanent face up causes a trigger ability permanent trigger. It triggers an additional time. Panharmonicon for Morph and Disguise. Counterpoint. You may cast a creature, instant, or sorcery or planeswalker spell from your graveyard with mana value less than or equal to that spell's mana value without paying its cost. Jeez. So you counter something, whatever its mana value, you get to cast 1 of 4 things for free. At instant speed, could be relevant, especially with sorceries, creatures, and planeswalkers. Unshakable Tail. Enters battlefield at the beginning of your upkeep, surveil 1. Whenever 1 or more creature cards are put in the graveyard from your library, investigate. Sack a clue, return Unshakable Tail from your graveyard to your hand. It's just a value card. I think you're just chasing clues by forcing yourself to put things from the top of your library into your graveyard. And that's about the nice parts about this card. Foreboding Steamboat. Enters the battlefield, each player chooses 2 non-token, non-vehicle creatures they control. Exile them until the steamboat leaves. When the steamboat attacks, put a card exiled with it into its owner's graveyard. If you do, investigate. So you could permanently deal with things by throwing it from underneath this into the people's graveyards. It's kind of nice. It's also a 5/7 for 5 mana, and it's got crew too. Real nice crew cost and pretty powerful for what it does. Because it affects each player. They have to exile two non-token, non-vehicle things, so you'll hit 8 things with this. You save yours for last because it'll take you 7 turns of attacking. I have Dusk Mantle.
Great eye is ever watchful.
Flying Lifelink, 3/8 for 7. What a confusing card. So if you surveil a spell into your graveyard, you're allowed to cast it, and if you do cast it, you could pay life instead, and the cards that you have selection from are the ones you surveilled. Oh, this guy's kind of cool. Final Word Phantom. Flash Flying for 3 mana. It's a 1/4. During each of your opponent's end step, you may cast spells as though they had flash. That's really nice. It limits to end step, but I mean, that's when most people cast their stuff at instant speed anyways. The only time you kind of care is about messing with the stack or pre-combat. That's probably the only times that you wish you could play things at instant speed without having priority, but it's kind of cool. Copy Catchers. For 2 mana, whenever you surveil, you may pay 2. If you do, create a token that's a copy of Copy Catchers. It's a lot of copies. Whoa. At the beginning of your upkeep, you surveil 1. Then if there are 15 more cards in your graveyard, you solve the case. Once it's solved, whenever you cast a non-legendary creature spell, you get to copy it. I feel like that's pretty easy to do. Marvo the Deep Operative. Whenever it attacks, clash the defending player. Whenever you win a clash, draw a card. Then you may cast a spell from your hand with mana value 8 or less without paying its cost. It's 8 because he's got 8 limbs. At least it's just a combat trigger. It's got 8 toughness. It'll probably survive a lot. This is a nice clue payoff. Tangle Trove Kelp. Word 2. When at the beginning of each combat, other clues you control become 6/6 plants till end of turn. Then you can sack Tangle Grove to draw a card like a clue, because it is a clue. It's a clue plant. We love clues. On the trail, whenever you draw your second card each turn, you may put a land from your hand onto the battlefield tapped. I feel like that happens a lot in Magic, drawing 2 cards, and the likelihood of you drawing lands is really good. So for 2 mana and some consistent scaling ramp, I love this enchantment. Whoa, Merchant of Truth, flying 2/5 for 4. Non-token creatures you control dies, you get to investigate, but clues have Exalted. If you don't know what Exalted does, whenever a creature attacks alone, it gets +1/+1 per exalted thing you have. If you have a lot of clues, which this will produce, you could attack with 1 thing and it could be a 20/20 if you have enough clues in play. That's kind of fun. I like it. I love Sublime Archangel. It's one of my favorite cards. Whoa, Knowledge is Power. It's a 5 mana enchantment. Creatures control get +X/+X for X the number of cards you draw on this turn. It's like the Sphinx. It got +1/+0 per time you drew. Now it's an enchantment. It affects all your creatures. That's really fun. Follow the Bodies, Gravestorm. For each permanent put in your graveyard that turn, you get to copy this spell, and you put a clue token in for every single one. Detective of the Month has Ascend. If you don't know what Ascend is, it's when you have 10 permanents in play, and you can't lose it. It's like a Planeswalker emblem. So you have a City's Blessing, and detectives you control can't be blocked. Whenever you draw your second card each turn, create a 2/2 detective. Armed with Proof. You investigate twice, and then clues you control are now equipment. They can be attached for 2 mana, and they give +2/+0. It's the gift that keeps on giving. Makes your clues a lot more threatening. Sophia Dog Detective. Enters the battlefield, create a tiny legendary 2/2 green dog. That's also detective with trample. For 1 mana, sack an artifact token. Put a +1/+1 counter on each dog you control. Whenever a dog you control deals damage to a player, create a food token, then investigate. I like how the dog is like crawling up her thigh. It looks like a big bloodhound. I feel like most dogs do this when they're scared of something, and then you could see the shadow of whatever it is. Good job conveying fear, wizards.
Be afraid.
Or Campbell White, good art. It's unfortunate that the dog token you make is legendary, so you only get 1. Otherwise, you could probably abuse this if it was anything else. But it wants you to do dog tribal because it puts counters on all your dogs and gives you tokens when your dogs connect. So that'd be an interesting deck archetype, especially in Bant colors. Whoa. Spectacular Showdown. Put a double strike counter on target creature, then goad each creature that had a double strike counter put on it this way. You're encouraged for putting double strike counters on your opponent's stuff, and then they'll go to combat with each other, and then you could overload it for 7, and I'm pretty sure you'll kill some people, but whoever survives, you better be worried because they're gonna have creatures with double strike, and they can just use them on you. Wow. This is a really sweet 4-drop enchantment. If an opponent would take an extra turn, they skip that turn. Whenever an opponent attacks you with 2 creatures, draws their second card, or casts their second spell, you draw a card. Pretty much anything that anyone ever does in EDH. If multiple people are playing the same turn and doing all these things, you could potentially draw 9 cards, but I doubt that people can do all these at once, but you never know. Take the bait. Cast the spell only during an opponent's turn, only during combat. Prevent all damage that would be dealt to you in Planeswalker's control. Untap all attacking creatures and goad them. After this phase, there's an additional combat phase. Oh, they thought that through and made it so you force your opponents to beat on each other at the turn of. That's good. Mob Verdict. Each player secretly votes for another, but then the votes are revealed. Each vote for an opponent, they get 2 damage. And then for each vote that was picked for you, you also get to draw a card.
You're between the rock and a hard case.
Redemption Arc. Enchanted creatures indestructible and goaded. Exile an enchanted creature. Yeah, I like this. When goad kind of sucks and as the game goes on, because when it turns into a 1-on-1, goad does nothing. There is no other player to attack, so they have to attack you. This scales nicely into that late game, so they could exile that creature and not get beat on by it. Oh, 2-mana enchantment. A Hot Pursuit. Enters the battlefield, suspect a creature an opponent controls. As long as Hot Pursuit's in play, it's also goaded. If you're playing a suspect deck where you're just suspecting everybody's things, their stuff can never attack you. And then we get to the late game, whoever survives, this bottom ability is handy. When 2 or more players have lost the game, gain control of all the goaded creatures until end of turn, and then you get to untap them and they gain haste. So you get to use them on your opponent. It's pretty sweet to beat them to death with evasive creatures. Havoc Eater. Flying, enters the battlefield. Each opponent goads up to 1 target creature that opponent controls. Put X counters on Havoc Eater, where X is the total power of creatures goaded this way. Feather? Yeah, this is a new feather. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell that targets only feather, you may choose any number of other creatures that spell could target and pay 2 for each of those creatures. If you do, for each of those creatures, copy the spell. You copy the target's that. Oh god. These text boxes are horrible. They're so large. This is basically giving your spell Strive without calling it Strive. 4/3 with Flying Lifelink though. Those are good for a 3-drop. Covetous Elegy. Each player chooses up to 2 creatures they control and sacks the rest. Then you create a tapped treasure for each creature your opponents control. At max, you'll get 6 treasures back and it'll pay back for the spell. That's kind of cool. I like that. You don't get the 2 best things. I like spells that impact the board and pay for themselves. I think that alone is good enough. Syndicate Heavy. At the beginning of each end step, if you gain 4 more life this turn, investigate. It has an X stored. If you somehow manage to cast 4 spells and pay 1 extra, you'll get to that bottom ability pretty consistently, but you'll probably be in life gain decks doing it by some other means than X stored. Suppressor Skyguard. Whenever a player attacks you, if that player has another opponent who isn't being attacked, prevent all combat damage that would be dealt to you this turn. So basically you're forcing people to share the love, otherwise the damage is nullified. I mean, you could still manipulate that some more damage is being dealt to you unless it's being dealt to someone else, but fun card that it makes people split, and it kind of counters Voltron strategies because they only have 1 creature in play. You'll just prevent the damage every single time. Corporal Projection. Red and blue, target creature control gains Myriad till end of turn, and it has an overload for 7. If you do that overload and you have a full board, I'm pretty sure that's a game over spell. You're making basically 4 versions of everything that's in play, so you could go wide enough. I'm pretty sure there's plenty of like special effects on all those cards that might be a nightmare to resolve. Resinous Technician. Enters the battlefield, discard a card. If you do, investigate twice. Tap X untapped artifacts. Copy target instant or sorcery spell with mana value X. May choose new targets. Hopefully you get a lot of untapped artifacts. Lanus Genetics Expert. Has evolved. Whenever 1 or more +1/+1 counters are put on it, investigate that many times. Whenever you sack a clue, put a +1/+1 counter on another creature you control. Well, you could size up everything quite nicely. Make a bunch of clue tokens. Unruly Crassus. Trample 4/4 for 3. When it attacks, you may have its base power and toughness of another creature you control become XX, where X is Unruly Crassus' power, and it has adapt for 3. I'm not too terribly excited. It doesn't bring a whole lot to the table. I don't know why I'd ever play it. Demir Strandcatcher. Whenever you attack, surveil X, where X is the number of opponents being attacked. Jeez. So maximum of 3. To the end of each end step, if there are 3 more cards that are put in the graveyard from anywhere other than the battlefield this turn, draw a card. But if you want to get that draw trigger just from itself, you have to always mill the 3, and I'm sure you'll want to keep something. You're just playing from the top of your deck at that point, and then Surveil is all about card selection, and you're kind of not playing that way with this commander.
That would be counterproductive, sir.
Vengeful Ancestor. It's a 4-drop dragon, and when it enters the battlefield or attacks, you get to goad something, and whenever a goaded creature attacks, its controller loses a life. That's kind of fun. Memory Vampire. When it deals damage to a player, any number of target players each mill that many cards, then you may collect evidence 9. When you do, you may cast target non-land card from defending player's graveyard without paying its cost. Evidence 9. I don't like any card that has evidence greater than 4, because then it's a little too situational, and you want these things to happen every turn, because there's fewer turns in Commander, or just in Magic in general, where you can't afford to play their RNG game Aegis the Legion. Equipped creature gets +1/+1 and has mentor. Whenever the creature mentors a creature, put a shield counter on that creature. Not only do you size it up, but you also get to protect it as well. That's kind of nice. Boros Strike Captain. When it and at least 2 other creatures attack, exile the top card of your library. During your turn, during any turn, you attacked with 3 or more creatures, you may play that card. That's nice. So you could stockpile stuff. Herald of Ilharg. Whenever you cast a creature spell, put 2 counters on Herald. That spell is 5 mana or greater. It deals damage equal to the number of counters on it to each opponent. Cast a lot of creatures and you could maybe kill everybody with group select.
Moto Surf!
Stampede Surfer. Whenever attacks, for each opponent, create a 2/2 green boar that's tapped and attacking. Dang. Well, if you want to make your board wide real fast, Stampede Surfer does the job quite well. Conclave Evangelist. When it deals damage to a player, create a token that's a copy of Conclave. It also says Myriad. Wow. You swing with all 4, and then if any of them make a contact, including the ones that are going to exile at end step, you get to make a Conclave, and you get to keep that one. Vernal Sovereign. Enters the battlefield or attacks, create a green and white elemental. This creature's power and toughness is equal to the number of creatures you control. It's like voice, but more expensive body. And it also triggers on attack. And that's why it costs 4 mana more. It's really good for making really scary tokens. Frenzy Gore Spawn. For each front, go to creature that player controls. Whenever 1 or more creatures attack one of your opponents, those creatures gain menace. I like that you get the choice. Carnage Interpreter. Enters the battlefield, discard your hand, then investigate 4 times. As long as you have 1 or fewer cards in hand, it gets +2/+2. Well, that's a pretty fair card. Amsu Swarm's Hunger. Flying menace. Other insects have menace. It only triggers once a turn. The clauses and the amount of text on these cards are insane. You gotta note it's CMC, because that influences how many counters gets put on it. Shorthand version. Sludge Titan. When it enters or attacks, mill 5, and then you get to put a creature or a land from among them into your hand. Interesting card selection and graveyard filling. I love Titans. I love that they all do the same effect where they ETB and have an attack trigger. I think I like this one. Just 5 cards deep, that's a pretty good magic number, even in EDH. Mr. Green, this is actually my favorite character from the Clue movie.
Sit down, Mr.
I had to stop her from screaming.
When it attacks starting with you, each player votes for the profit or security. You create a number of treasure tokens equal to twice the number of profit votes, or put a number of +1/+1 counters on each creature you control equal to the number of security votes. I like how the treasure one is doubled, but the counters is not. I wonder why they did that. I feel like the only time they would not pick the +1/+1 counters is if your board is pretty scary. Headliner Scarlet has haste. When it enters the battlefield, creatures target player control can't block this turn. So you have your upkeep. Exile the top card of your library face down. You may look at it and play that card this turn. The bottom ability is okay, but it's not that great. There are tons of impulse for 4 mana cards out there, like the Candidate from Ixalan. That's what this reminds me of, and I don't play that card because it kind of sucks. And so does Headliner Scarlet. What a little bit of a bummer. Apothecary White. Vigilance 3/4. Whenever you attack, you get to create a food token for each player being attacked. Then you can tap X untap foods to create X white humans. Both abilities affect each other, so it just creates a snowball effect. And with each pass, it gets bigger. You can make a lot of tokens with this if you get enough combats. I don't know if this would work in mono white, because mono white is awful, and having this as your commander doesn't really fix your problems too well. And the 1/1s, they're not too terribly impactful. You need something else to pair up with it to win the game. That was the end of today's spoilers. I hope you all enjoyed. I know it was long, but they're all done. So if you haven't seen my previous spoilers and you stayed this long, subscribe. Everyone take care now. Have a great time. Bye.
I'm gonna go home and sleep with my wife.